changing and as ever changing as the urban landscape in which they're situated in the London boroughs of Newham, Tower Hamlets and Greenwich, which for better or for worse are constantly undertaking processes of regeneration. But my point is that the line is far more than the artworks that it brings together. Its location in East London requires attention on community integration, arguably more so than art confined by institutional walls. And this is why the Line's commissioning programme is increasingly intent on building in community engagement, so that the commissioner's culture has not been developed in isolation, but alongside ongoing consultations with community members. In other words, the curatorial process is increasingly centred around collaboration and co-design. While the Line is distinct from museums, so this collaborative approach also means that we work closely with numerous arts institutions, many of which obviously have their own collections, so including Museum of London, National Portrait Gallery, Royal Museums Greenwich and Foundation for Contemporary Art Ghana, which have been some recent ones, as well as dance organisations including English National Ballet and Academy, the fashion designer Roxanda, and the and educational institutions such as London College of Fashion and London Film School. So it's an ongoing conversation with multiple organisations. So I will focus on one recent project to demonstrate how these ideas have worked in practice. And this one is the Longitudinal Dialogues, Cultural Conversations on the Meridian, which is a project in collaboration with Royal Museums Greenwich and ARIT Phase 2, funded by British Council's International Collaborations Grant and the Henry Moore Foundation. In July this year, we reached the end of this multi-year project with the launch of the commission Tribe and Tribulation by the Ghanaian artist Serge Tukwai. This totemic sculpture, which stands over 5 meters tall, is located outside the O2 on the Greenwich Peninsula. It's made of reclaimed painted timber from Ghanaian fishing boats and includes a sound installation featuring recordings from places such as Cape Coke Castle, Elmina Castle, James Forts, and the location on the Meridian Line in Tema, and the first 3 of which are former slave forts. The work interrogates our relationship to the ocean, migration, and the underlying history of objects and places, with the sound projecting north, east, south, and west. It invites the listener to consider the legacies of these locations, with concepts of the ocean extending in both history, so from the transatlantic slave trade to modern day fishing, and geography, from London to Accra along the Meridian. The commission was realised at the end of a research and development process that included the screening of Clottey's film The Displaced at Royal Museums Greenwich as part of World Oceans Day in 2020, and a research residency at the same institution in September 2021. During his residency, Serge explored the museum's collections related to oceans, maritime history, and trade and shipping routes in London and Accra. Following this, Serge took part in the Line's Longitudinal Dialogues engagement programme, which workshops delivered in 6 primary schools in London and Accra in spring. So over 600 children took part, making masks inspired by the artist's practice, using plastic rubbish and recycled materials, with the aim to engage pupils in conversations around oceans, plastic pollution and climate change. These works were succeeded by a celebratory procession with the school children in May, which happened simultaneously in London and Accra. So in London, which you can see on the left here, Serge led the procession along the Greenwich Peninsula. So I'm hoping now, if all goes well, to play a short clip from this film. It's playing from Vimeo, so this might lag a little bit, but if this doesn't work, it's accessible on Vimeo, on the Line's Vimeo page, and also if you look on our Instagram, it's available there. So Louise and please fortunately let me know if this doesn't work out very well. So this longitudinal dialogues project demonstrates how the commissioning of public sculpture can be far more than the installation of a physical object. It has the potential to draw together cultural institutions locally and internationally and engage young audiences in conversations on both heritage and the environment in the past, present and future. So the artist's installation on the Greenwich Peninsula is not conceived in isolation to the engagement programme surrounding it. It's an integral part of this process. As the line continues in its programming in the near future, it plans to integrate local audiences into the commissioning process. From groups of local young people to community advisory groups, the line is developing a co-commissioning curatorial practice to challenge top-down commissioning decision-making, working on a process that enables public sculpture to be developed for local communities by local communities. So this prompts the question, who is the line for? Who is its audience? So certainly as a public art project featuring sculptures by artists such as Anthony Gormley, Tracy Emin and Gary Hume, it exists for those interested in contemporary sculpture. As a public footpath in East London, it exists for those wanting to spend time in green spaces and by the waterways. And as these school workshops demonstrate, the line is also a free cultural resource for local schools to use. The line leads free school tours and has developed a series of learning resources in collaboration with artists and educational consultants. So these are designed to enhance the curriculum and prompt debates around the potential of art in public space. An example of this are the teaching notes and class presentations related to Thomas J. Price's sculpture Reaching Out, which are available on our website. This is a sculpture a sculpture depicting a young woman holding a mobile phone, addressing questions of representation, power and diversity in public sculpture. The work is used as a starting point for engaging students in larger questions related to public statues. And as the toppling of the Edward Colston statue in Bristol during the Black Lives Matter protests in 2020, it's vital that these questions are addressed. Price's sculpture challenges the tradition of monumental public sculpture, as the fictional character of a young Black woman not only opposes the overly white, overly masculine, and frequently highly colonial connotations of public sculpture. Instead, it places in the public realm a figure that at once celebrates the woman on a more than life-size scale, but at the same time is hugely relational. It is a sculpture in which many people, and especially many young people, can identify. Addressing these questions in a classroom setting emphasises the importance of taking ownership of the local cultural sphere. And the line's work with young people also extends to paid employment. For the second year running, we have appointed 18 to 21-year-olds from the boroughs of Newham, Tower Hamlets and Greenwich to work along the route during the summer months. Recruited through local schools and colleges, the line facilitates personal statement and CV writing during the pre-application stage. And once appointed, they undergo paid training, and that this year also included sessions with artists Larry Achimpong, who you can see on the left, and Gisela Torres, as well as the historian Alice Proctor, who leads anti-colonial tours of London under the name The Exhibitionist. Stationed on the route during the weekend, they engage the public in conversations on artworks, opening dialogues on their significance in the public realm. So if you have an opportunity, I highly recommend you go and see them during the next few weeks on the weekend. And this programme has been developed in collaboration with the National Portrait Gallery and London College of Fashion as part of the Line's project Visible Invisible, which last year also included schools workshops on themes of identity and representation, and this year will include some exciting new exhibitions and commissions, which the process of which the young people will be involved in, so stay tuned. And finally, I'd like to touch upon the Line's Wellbeing programme for thinking about this question about who benefits from the line. Developed in collaboration with local GPs and mental health specialists, this programme includes weekly wellbeing walks on the route, which attendees can either self-refer to or be referred by their local social prescribers. So with social isolation, physical activity, they've both been vastly exacerbated over COVID. And with the increasing and disproportionate lack of access to green spaces in London, these walks offer an opportunity for local residents to explore the art, nature and heritage on the line in Newham, as well as join a community of regular walkers. And alongside these walks, the line also has run a programme of creative walks for people living with early stage dementia, in collaboration with New Deal Partnership, which includes a 30-minute walk and creative activity that this year has focused on healing plants found locally on the route. So I'll conclude this presentation, because I realise I'm running out of time, by focusing on how my background in research translates to this, my new role as a development coordinator at the Line. Academic research can be very different to work within a small arts organisation for sure, and this transition from student to professional life can sometimes be nerve-wracking, especially if, like me, you've spent your adult life so far in higher education. But I have felt a lot of consistency with my research and the work that I now do, as well as the potential to explore new avenues. So for the final part of this presentation, I will discuss the resonances between these two. So as a development coordinator, my role in the organisation is to contribute to the writing of grant applications and funding reports, evaluate projects, and organise public events. So this is what I get up to on a day-to-day basis. I work to multiple deadlines and always in discussion with the team. So in the past few months, this has involved major applications for various funders and the planning of our inaugural symposium, which will take place in October and facilitate a dialogue between key practitioners within the field of art, nature and mental well-being, featuring sites and archival visits, creative activities and a panel discussion. This programme is perhaps the most in line with my background in research, as I organised and participated in a number of talks during my PhD, including the online talk series that I organised with Louise last year. However, I also see grant writing not only as an extension of those I wrote for my PhD, which was funded by the AHRC and required numerous applications and reports throughout. I see it as a challenge to articulate the potential impact of a project in the most accessible way, explaining why it matters to those with the power to make it happen. It extends far beyond the logistical and quantitative details of a project. It is, much like my thesis, about how to make people care. And the Line's fundraising strategy extends beyond purely artistic circles, as it seeks to gain support from a wide range of both cultural and national, social trusts and foundations, including the Arts Council England, British Council and the National Lottery Heritage Fund. It also seeks support from corporate funders, recently Arup, who you saw on the list here, as well as landowners such as Van Stint and people who own land around the Greenwich Peninsula. And I mention landowners because it's important to remember that despite all this talk around public space, land across East London is not always owned by councils, but often by private developers, such as the Royal Docks in Newham, which was designated a special enterprise zone in 2012, and London City Island, which is near Cannon Town, where our Rana Begum sculpture sits, and is the collaboration of two property developers. So these concerns are in many ways an extension of my exploration of site-specific sculpture during my doctoral research. So in my thesis, site-specific sculpture became a way to engage with environments and extend this notion of art beyond gallery walls. This obviously lends itself well to a concern with public sculpture, especially as I've engaged with questions on how art can interrogate the ways in which both natural and urban space is governed. Public sculpture can so easily act as another form of colonisation, especially in a city where gentrification is so prominent. And so this is something that the Line takes very seriously and is actively working not just to exhibit artworks that are well known within traditional cultural dialogues, but to think how the organisation can help people, how it can engage and inspire individuals, not merely in terms of what the organisation believes to be socially and culturally significant, but the diversity of beliefs that belong to those the area in which people live, work and study on the route, so from the young to the old. And so finally, and perhaps most obviously, my research subject and artistic values align to many of the commissions and projects that have been realised by the Line in the past few years. So it's not by accident that I've decided to focus on the work of Clotty, as my research in contemporary art in the ocean is certainly shared with the Longitudinal Dialogues project. And I joined the organisation when this project was already underway, but it's been amazing to see how a major ethical drive of my research of how to make people care about ocean environments across space and history has been implemented through school workshops. It is my contention that it's been my contention, throughout my PhD, that research, whether in academia or within an artist residency, should not exist in isolation. When concerned with the ways in which the world is framed, whether related to the ocean or to politics or identity and representation, it is vital that these actually engage with the reality of these situations and that these ideas aren't contained to a theoretical bubble. It is also not a top-down situation. Wider communities do not merely learn from academic or artistic results once completed. It's an ongoing reciprocal process and an ongoing dialogue in which different understandings of art, culture, and heritage coexist within one space and are equally as valid. On a conceptual level, my interest in limitations, access, and knowledge exchange within my own articulations of the ocean is very much put into practice by the Lines methodology. This is increasingly centred on collaboration and co-commissioning with the aim to make art accessible in a country where government cuts to the arts create social and economic barriers to creative opportunities. So as a gallery without walls, the Line seeks to break down these barriers one commission and one project at a time. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, for the wonderful talk. It is really, really impressive to see how you build on the real experiences and interactions on site with artworks and combine with your profession that learned from university. This is a create and mobility engaging in city places. This is really impressive. And everybody, there's a copy of the video in your chat box. So if it didn't going very well, and you can just copy the link and watch it later. And now I'm looking forward to some questions from or feedback from our attendees. Please feel free to press the raise your hand button. You can ask the question directly or type your questions or feedback in the chat box. We'll be with you soon. So when waiting for some questions from you, I'd like to take the advantage to start with some questions quickly. My question is, I learned that the Line is a museum which is not limited with institutionalized collections. I think the collections in a very traditional concept, but I know there's a new concept with collections for contemporary art. And I think many institutions are in a very similar situation, especially in the area of contemporary art. That might means you need to develop more flexibilities or more flexible projects, maybe cooperating with other institutions like you mentioned, and portrait gallery, and school of fashion. So could you talk more about it? What has the concept of collections changed in contemporary art projects today? And what does that mean in pros and cons if you work for an institution which needs to consider different demands when cooperating with other institutions? Are there any difficulties?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's interesting. Obviously, the Line it isn't a museum. I feel like I'm going back to like the first year of my undergraduate where I'm looking at like what is a museum and things like that. So it doesn't have, as I said before, it doesn't have a collection. It doesn't. I mean, we don't have a venue. We don't even have a building, if that makes sense. So it is entirely rooted within within the space that it is. I think the one benefit is that that the possibilities of what we work with are kind of endless. So by looking at loans and looking at commissions, we're not kind of specified to kind of always be drawing on that collection that we have. but we can look about how we can collaborate with multiple different organisations' collections and think about actually how we can kind of create dialogues between different organisations, if that makes sense. Because obviously, I mean, that's obviously a huge potential, but obviously it makes things perhaps a little bit difficult, because then you're having to always be talking to other people and you're always dependent on other people, and people want to shape projects in certain ways and things like that. But I think when I think about collections, especially when we're thinking about ideas of community, is that obviously it's when we look at things like the British Museum collection, it's always related to things about power. Collections have obviously histories around we know colonial pasts, about questions of ownership, of who gets the right to own these objects and have them in their collections. So I think that's increasingly what we're moving away from, and thinking about ideas of loans, perhaps loans from institutions, is about how to create new audiences on a temporary basis. I think that kind of answers your questions. It creates a lot of logistical problems, but also a lot of ways of doing things that are new in a roundabout way.
Yes, I think it's impressive if you cooperate different institutions. There's some way you need to cooperate different demands, but also opportunity to cooperate, like combine different creative idea together. It's beyond like one single institution can do. We got a question from Steve. He says, "Thank you for a fascinating talk. The question is, have you been able to evaluate what audiences think of the artworks and what kind of impacts they have on people? Are they what you expected?"
That's a good question. I think evaluation is increasingly being part of my job, so it sends me like, no. Yes, I think evaluation has become a huge part of it, of what we do. In terms of we have frequently been working with an evaluator who's been doing a long project on the work that I showed you, the Tribe and Tribulations sculpture and that whole longitudinal dialogues project. So we are we're expecting a kind of formal report on that. So we're always looking about so the impact it's had on the school children, the different partners, the teachers, as well as the sculpture itself. So obviously, the longer the project in terms of engagement, the more stakeholders you have in the project, which means the more opportunities actually for evaluation. In terms of the ones on the line itself, obviously it's quite difficult because it's a public space. So we don't have the downside of not having those institutional walls is that you don't have someone monitoring it on a daily basis saying, "Hi, can you fill out this survey?" or anything like that. So things like numbers, like footfall numbers, and also that daily evaluation of people coming to visit just kind of isn't as easy. But we are so that's something that our youth guides are currently doing through their surveying and things like that, where they can really talk to people, engage with people, and get that sense of audience. So it is, yes, we are increasingly looking at evaluation. Thumbs up. Thanks, Steve.
Yeah, Francesca, there's a question during the talk. I'm not sure if this is or not. Can you see the question? So it's from Brandon. Was the Rana Bergen catching color image created as an AR or NFT or?
Is this the one we showed? Because no, that was just a photograph. So the sculpture itself is in. I'm not sure if you're aware of London City Island. I think you said you're coming from Quebec, right? But no. So basically, it's a sculptural installation. If you look on our website, you might get another photo. It's a very nice photo, but it's not been technologically modified or in any way.
Thank you. And any more questions from audience? And you can raise your hand if you want to ask question directly. Here's a question from Leaf. I think Francesca can read it. So hi, thank you for the interesting talk. You mentioned that the line curatorial approach is challenging top-down commissioning practice. Could you speak a little more what this might mean in practical terms, other than working collaboratively, which you mentioned?
Yeah, so I don't want to go into too many details because obviously these are the things we're working on at the minute. So I don't want to provide information on things that are still being planned. But I think we are increasingly keen on things like community consultation events. So we hosted one last year in which we get the opportunity for various people to come around and sit down and give this is another thing that feeds into evaluation in terms of what they think. So I think in terms of working collaboratively, we don't just mean other cultural institutions. It's community members, so people almost as if like you create an advisory board for people to really be able to state their opinions and say what works and what doesn't, and have some agency in deciding actually what exists within that public space. So it isn't just collaboration in terms on an institutional level, but actually on a ground level in which it's the people who live there, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I can say. I won't say anymore. Okay, so so yeah.
Yeah, thank you. All right. I have a question here. So my question is about the accessibilities and also the types of audience groups. So I think London is a international capital city, in my opinion, means a variety of groups of audiences that you need to cooperate with. And could you talk about how that affects your target or strategies when looking for a founder, especially when your sponsors might have different expectations toward the audience? For example, do they have preference for audience between like international tourists or local citizens? And when you cooperate with them, how you make a balance of them?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, a lot of the times there are, especially, so we tend to get funding from, as I said, there are cultural institutions, places like the Arts Council, but there are also, as I mentioned, things like landowners. So, and that is obviously geographically bound. So it's like, how will you directly benefit this community? So for things, for example, like the wellbeing walks that I mentioned, chances are that funding is going to be should directly benefit people from the boroughs of Newham, etc. Also the same for our youth guides, I believe, is that obviously we've recruited them from a very local area, but I think there were it's from a funders that specifically related to around Stratford and the Olympic Park. So you do have to think about, okay, how is it going to immediately benefit people within that area? We've done less about actually international tourists, actually. I think that rarely, it's more that they specify local rather than wider reach, but then perhaps that's probably more related to kind of the artistic, like international artists, things like that. But I think it's important to flag that obviously you mentioned it's a very multicultural city. So when we mean local, we also mean multicultural. It's looking at actually the diversity within that local area, if that makes sense. And a lot of the funding will specifically be related to that.
Yes, thanks. And this is a very interesting thing. So you are engaging in multicultural cities. So I have further question about this. Since when you're raising some like issue, especially when you're working on the idea of ocean, and quite often we need to say something about the climate change, the global warming, and also the global system, which make differences, consequences in different area. So when you cooperate with this issue, it kind of sometimes you might encounter some people who hold different political opinions, and how to cooperate with this. Is it like conversation happening, and it's kind of debates with different political groups?
That's an interesting question. I haven't come across different political views in that sense yet, but I would be interested to see how that relates to, especially the ones related to things like climate change. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that we see it as the whole point of things like community consultation and this idea of really having it's a dialogue, so you can't shut down other people's opinions. So it's there to embrace that conversation and actually start a conversation around these issues. I think it would be what we do. It would be hypocritical of us to say that we don't listen to other people's views if at the same time we're talking about these ideas of facilitating conversations, if that makes sense. But at the same time, you know, we're not going to advocate for that, if that makes sense. Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks. I imagine in country our way, there's more opportunity to have this kind of conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. And any question from the audience? And you can type it or just raise your hand. Oh, Helen, I got a question. Oh, please.
Hello, hi, congratulations, Francesca. This was such an inspiring talk, really brilliant. And I have more of a comment than a question, but I loved what you said about, you know, linking your research experience to curating, and what you said about research being constant dialogue. And I really love that, because I think it's something that really links to curating as well. And that's maybe where the two disciplines can really kind of shake hands or build bridges, that nothing is stationary in your research. You're kind of urge to question things all the time and find different perspectives of things. And I know you mentioned that the line doesn't have a collection, but whether it's kind of collection based or exhibition based, I think every exposing artwork is really about asking new questions and finding new perspectives of looking at it. And that's where you find interest in it, even if you're not a researcher yourself, or even if you're not somebody who is an art historian, or you just want to benefit from art as a member of the community. So more than a question, I just wanted to say my heart kind of, you know, popped with bliss when you said that, because I thought this is exactly why it matters, that it's really great if you are a curator and you come into curating or, you know, heritage work through academic research, and it doesn't mean that the two worlds have to be separate. And I'm just so happy to see people from both of these worlds working together or bridging these words. So a massive applause. So sorry, it's not a question, but a big applause.
Thank you, Helena.
I haven't introduced Helena well to our audience. So Helena was our previous speaker. She's working for the University Collection of the University of York. I think it's fantastic to ask you both about this question. For Francesca, do you think the line has different types of mobility or autonomy from a museum, which is like well institutionalized? And maybe Helena could share your ideas as well, based on your experience of managing university collections as well, please.
I do like the idea of mobility. I think there is something that I mentioned within my talk about the fact that obviously the idea of not working with a permanent collection, and the fact that it was loans are commissions based, is that it's increasingly dynamic. You know, you can have something in place for a few years, and then that will go, and you think, okay, what can change? So in that, it's an endless opportunity, like a temporary exhibitions program, but in the public space, to be able to have that kind of ever-changing process that can continually be updated. And obviously collections are also continually being updated, but I think it's doing it in a very public, visible way, which I think is very nice, because it shows that it's a process, and it means that the possibilities of what it will look like in the future are actually really quite exciting. But also in terms of mobility, I think the international approach of it, I think, is quite interesting from an engagement point of view. Obviously, I showed you the thing where we worked in Ghana, but there are so many dialogues you could make with different public spaces that I think is a really interesting, and hopefully somewhere we will go in the future. It feels more dynamic. I'm not sure if that's fair, because I'm sure other university institutions are, but for me, that's what I really appreciate.
Yes, I think your role is very organic, that I need to cooperate new ideas, and that's also bring the mobility to create new projects and engage in the local society. And Helena?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. And I like to think of kind of when you said mobility, I wasn't quite sure at first, like in what sense. And then I thought, well, actually, I can think of quite a few, different twists on what mobility kind of can mean. And one thing that really kind of struck me in relation to specifically university curating is that unlike curating in a permanent institution where you have a collection and what your locality, who your locals are, who come and engage with you at a university setting, you have this immense influx of students in and out all the time. So you might have a great student to work with on a project one year, but then the next year they're gone at a completely different institution. So I think that is a really interesting aspect of the specifics of university curating, for example, and I think maybe that's relevant to the line as well in terms of London being such a dynamic city, and I can imagine people moving into the area and moving out of the area in a much more dynamic fashion than maybe we would experience in the regions. But so yeah, that kind of mobility of students is something that really strikes me, and that I see the role of a university curator as somebody who has to like connect all these dots and be like a golden thread of stability in an environment which is so dynamic, and where people come in and come out and come in with different reasons and then leave for different reasons as well. And then when I was talking about mobility, another thing kind of came to my mind, and that was social mobility as well. And I was thinking especially in university curating, but also in all the projects that Francesca mentioned in terms of the community kind of cohesion projects. So I think social mobility comes into play as well, and it links to when people feel that they are not kind of entitled to enter into collections or enter into interaction with curators and art historians, and how much we want to break down these walls and make it much more open, and also facilitate social mobility for those who come and who maybe feel like, well, this is not my world, I don't belong in here. And you ideally want them to engage with the artwork and then leave the space thinking, actually, I bloody hell do belong in here. This is my space. Sorry for swearing, that was not appropriate at all. So we want people to feel that is their space as well, and that's maybe something that can kind of push towards more social mobility as an outcome as well. So, well, basically, in my view, kind of art just completely changes the world. So you name it, and we're going to change it through art. So yeah.
Yeah, this is very impressive that I see you guys' projects. Like every time we involve new people in a group, and that also means that new ideas involved. When we say this institutional wall, we might be imagine there's a boundary that we can't really access to the audience, or audience can just participate like as audience, is not participate like creator or the projects. And this is really impressive to see these projects really involve the new ideas, and how the new individuals can play more like active role participating in the new mobilities. And any question from audience? Oh, yeah. Oh, there's a question from Katharina. Hi, Helena. I like the topics you just raised in your replies. I do have a question for you. What do you mean by university curation in comparison of how it is understood in the museum? Thank you for the insight into your words, Francesca.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. That's great. I think what I mean as university curation is relating to my current role, which is working as a curator of an art collection, which is within a university, which does present a series of kind of exciting possibilities, but also challenges in relation to, or in a comparison to, working in a museum. And one of these things is that, for example, when you work in a traditional museum, a public-facing gallery or museum, it is very clearly your remit to produce exhibitions and engagement for your local community, for your region. There are specific groups maybe within that community that you want to engage with. And at the university, this ideally is also part of the plan, but also you need to play a role within the academic setting of your university. So engaging with the public is like one kind of microcosm that you want to look at, but then there's another microcosm, which is dealing with students. How do you contribute to research and teaching and learning? How do you contribute to the academic environment? How do you link to maybe the global links that the university is trying to foster? How do you enrich research? So it's almost like you have to juggle these two worlds, and I think they are, you know, wonderful, both of them, and that they are very well kind of connectable. And as Francesca was talking about, you know, that that interworld between, or interstate between, you know, I've spent some time focusing on my research, and you know, there's this kind of academic side of things, but then there's also the side of things which is dealing with the public and the outreach to the public and producing projects which will be fascinating to the academics, but also will have a meaningful contribution to the life of your local community and people who come and visit, you know, wherever you live. So that's what I mean by university curating, which has this kind of set of specifics in comparison to working, for example, by a council-run or a trust-run museum or gallery.
Thank you. This is a very good question. Another question from Isabel is for Francesca. Hello, thank you for the talk. Would you think that the line is landing towards the discussion of the institutionalizing the exhibition gallery space? It's great to see art objects within their different landscapes and communities, but are they still parallels to the institution structure? For example, the object standing and some viewers not knowing how to approach the object, perhaps having guides along the route help with this already.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think you can read deinstitutionalizing in a different ways. Obviously, physically, you know, yes, we don't have it. It is outside, and also in terms of, you say, the ideas of the power structures that are related to the institution as we see it. So I think in terms of the object in the space, I think obviously when there are certain expectations you have of when you enter a physical building, that you expect to see art, you going there with a certain expectation of what it is that you're going to see, whether you understand it or not. You are guided there by certain wall texts and have you that'll help you understand. When you're in the outside setting, obviously people are there for so many different contexts, and while that raises a kind of so many potentials, it also raises such more of an emphasis on the signage, you know, the kind of the contextualization of these artworks. And especially I'm absolutely sure there will be people who have walked the line and have absolutely no idea what it is that they're even next to artworks, let alone what these artworks are and who they're by, because it's a public walkway. People will go there for different reasons, and Helena, I'm sure you agree, within the university setting. I mean, I taught the module at York where you have to show these students around the York campus. They lived there. They had absolutely no idea that these were sculptures. That exists within any setting in which you're breaking down that kind of facade that says you're in an art institution, you're about to go and see an artwork. So in that sense, I guess, yes, we are deinstitutionalizing, but I don't agree that necessarily just begins with a physical space. You know, for example, we've had things that are exhibited inside as well. So we've done some work within a building in 3 Mills and had shown a Bill Viola work inside. So I think deinstitutionalization, I think, is very much also about really critically thinking about these power structures, and actually embracing the fact that people might not know where they are, what they're saying, and think about who are the ones in charge of actually dictating how people respond to these works. And having 18-year-olds on the line talking about these artworks to people is actually really fantastic. First of all, not only from an employability standpoint for what Helena was talking about in terms of social mobility, but also about them to have the opportunity to have their say on this public space in which they live, and it not coming from a higher authority, if that makes sense, even though obviously we do have signage that explains what these works are. So yeah, I think it is. I don't think it's a complete deinstitutionalization. I think physical space is also really interesting, but it's an interesting play on it, definitely.
Yeah, thank you, Isabel, for this interesting question. Yes, this is very important to think when we talk about institution, what does that mean? And it also relates to when we talk about institutional walls, so what is those walls? Like if the university is an institution, and I will just take this opportunity to ask this question. So the question is for students who are considering getting into the wall, like taking educational courses of museology or museum studies. Since you, Francesca and Helena, you study in history of art. So my question is, like how you organizing a project which is involved in a variety of practical museum practice. So what is new for you to learn when taking this role, and how important do you think academic techniques are in your daily ways? Francesca?
Yeah, so there are certain obvious things where in terms of like the skills I've learned during my PhD, research, writing, time management, all of the things that need to get you through a PhD, and I think and also just that kind of intellectual critical engagement with the artworks and that kind of thing. They're all hugely useful for what I do on a day-to-day basis. I would, if I were to offer advice for students, I would make the most of getting any kind of internship work experience, of seeing what it is hands-on working within within an institution in whatever capacity. I hate to say it because often this comes as like an extracurricular thing. Often they're not paid, and there are so many barriers. So I think that's what something, with our youth guides doing, that kind of is a first step to really helping with that, because so social mobility is there as well. But I think in terms of just understanding like the fast-pacedness, I don't know about you, Helena, but it feels incredibly fast-paced. Lots of different projects that you have to manage at the same time. So really just kind of shadowing and getting that experience, I think is really useful. And obviously, when you're doing a PhD, it's kind of all on your own. Even if you're not very organized, at least you might still have a mental track of where you are and what things are doing. Working within a team, you need to sort of translate that into an endless conversation with other people, which I really like. That's one thing. I finished my PhD, I was like, I want to work with people now. But yeah, so I think that makes sense.
Yes, definitely. Like working with different opinions and different ideas is sometimes very tiring, but it's also part of our profession. So when Carla was here last time, I did really keen to ask these questions. Do you think academic techniques still important when most of the tasks are maybe more practical or manual? Do you think, Hannah?
Yes, definitely. I think they're both really, really important. And in my kind of ideal vision, I'm really a great advocate for being somebody who has both. And I know that's very challenging to do, and not everybody can both get a PhD and get, all the museum's qualifications and have loads of practical hands-on experience. But I would always advocate for getting as close to that as possible. I have repeatedly found that kind of keeping a mental flexibility about things is really important as well. But I have repeatedly found that this kind of golden combination of having like a practical mindset, which enables you to deliver things, and especially in kind of regional museums, but even in bigger museums where, exhibitions are the bread and butter of the service, you just have to make sure you deliver these projects. You have to make sure that everything is on the wall, the labels are, there, everything is in place on time for the launch. But when the big wigs come in with the champagne, they have to have the artwork on the wall. So you have to have great time management and all these practical skills. But I have also come across so many situations where because you have that academic training and you are trained to inquire about things, to question things, to not take things for their face value, but look behind the surface and be inquisitive in everything you do. I have come across numerous opportunities where maybe colleagues who didn't have that academic training would just pass that opportunity by because they just wouldn't think there's anything interesting or anything that they can kind of do. But because I think one of the biggest things in an academic training for me is that it teaches you that literally everything you see, you can look at it with a different pair of eyes and you can turn it into something else. You can find a context into it. You can find questions around it, and then you can turn it into a project. So I have had many situations in my curatorial work where I, first encountered something, a collection of works or some material that has just been part of a museum service. Nobody's really touched it before. And I thought, hang on, this is something that I can do something with. And then you turn this into kind of novelty projects that really move yourself and the service that you're working for forward. So I know it's very kind of tricky to say. I know that students already have so much on their plates, and everybody's telling them you need to be this, you need to be that. So I know I'm not helping say that you have to be both. But basically what I'm saying is that I really believe that both the kind of hands-on museum practical-minded approach and the academic inquisitive, kind of endless inquiry kind of approach, both of them are really, really important. And whichever way you're inclined, it's valid. It will bring, credit to you. And combining the two, I think, is really, really important. So I'm always in for more collaboration between heritage institutions and academic institutions. Obviously, in university curating, these two get married really beautifully. But when I worked in public museums and galleries, I always wanted to collaborate with universities and have students on board, and vice versa. In my PhD research, I'm always interested in bringing in institutions as well. So do keep that friendship going and do bring all those different skills together. And even like having an original mix of skills, I think kind of in a way, like work with what you have. The older I am, I'm 42 now, and the older I am, the more I'm realizing that all these things that I always thought were a fault, my head is too much in the clouds, I keep thinking about things a bit differently. I don't know, I'm maybe too much of a visual learner and I don't remember the dates of things, and I can't put a nail into the wall, all these kind of things that I thought, they're holding me back. Actually, the older I get, the more I'm finding that these things are the ones that are making me kind of successful in different things that I do, because they bring a personal spin on things. So, while we're telling students you have to do this, you have to tick this box and you have to do that, of course you kind of have to do that. And I myself am, just slaving away finishing my PhD as well. So it is a bit of an uphill struggle. So I know that it's not easy, but I also think that you should always, as a student or early career professional, be really optimistic about the faults that you have, because they give you, they're like the the cost of being cheesy, the Leonard Cohen quote with the crack, there's a crack in everything and that's how the light gets in. I really think that that's true. And one of the great benefits of aging and becoming middle-aged is that I really see that is true. And it's these cracks that very often really give you the brightest light that's going to lead you forward. So trust in your faults. They're going to work for you in one way or another.
Thanks. I believe being creative to keep everybody younger. So thank Francesca and Helena and everyone for the fascinating discussions. I do really learn a lot of things, and there's many interesting questions as well. Now I'd like to move on to open conversation. So if you have any questions to ask, and it's also an opportunity you can raise. And this is an important section for our meeting, since this ICOM platform belongs to every one of you. So any contributed idea is valuable, and everyone is welcome to bring your thoughts, even if it might be beyond the topic we talked today. And I know it's a bit tricky to talk over the screen in a free structured session, so I'd like to bring some questions as a prompt. If any of you have any idea, please just join the conversation by either typing in the chat box or raising your hand. So I got 2 questions, and the first one is, what is a museum's institutional wall, and how do we transcend it from either inside or outside of institutions? I think we had a very interesting conversation about this. I know many of you have different museum experience. It can be from any angle, like architecture design, like rules for objects or accessibilities, or authority of interpretations, or digital justice, and so on. And the second question is, what techniques, like academic or practical techniques, do you think are important for any individual working in a museum but have not been trained quite well in school? The most important is, like, what can ICOM UK do to support students? For this question, I'm happy to learn more from anyone who is working for a museum, or anyone who is taking a course in school. From voices from students is very important for us. And we'll just post a question on the chat box, so anybody, if you have any idea, just share, just talk.
I think in terms of the first question, it's my mind just came to it because I saw something advertised at Rhizome that had a very similar title to this talk. I was like, but that was all related to technology and the potentials of technology to kind of break down these institutional walls. And I think it's a very interesting one because, in theory, obviously technology is kind of allows for a far greater audience, and you can tailor your programming accordingly. So obviously on Zoom, in COVID, we had online exhibitions and things like that. So I think there's a lot of potential for thinking there. But I think one thing I've started to learn, especially from working with the line, obviously working with things like the wellbeing program, especially, is how really you think about. Yeah, you also have to think about who your online audience is as well. Like, who are the people who are engaging in that way? And obviously the kind of digital divide still exists. So I don't think people love to talk about the potentials of technology as a kind of breaking down institutional walls, but really, who are the people, especially when you're talking about something so site specific and so local, who are these people? Are these the same people who are engaging with you in that way? And for things like wellbeing, things like schools programs, there are a lot of dissonances that I think need to be addressed more often. So it's finding combination approaches in order to kind of think about how to go beyond the institution, if that makes sense. And that's why working with things like GP practices, local schools, that kind of thing, I think allows you to transcend that ideology of the kind of global online presence, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's really answered your question, Louise, but I just think that was an interesting thought.
Yes, I think different areas have different imagine of the boundary, and that's why we need to talk about that and have conversation with the audience or participators. Oh, I think Katharina has something to talk. Please speak.
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Thank you for the inspiring talks. And I just wanted, you invited everyone, so I thought I'll just contribute. And I want to pick up on what Francesca said with the online presence and the walls in the museum. I think what sometimes people might underestimate is that online, I believe the walls or the hesitations are lower. like if you walk into a museum and you look at the architecture of it, it can be quite intimidating. And when you're in and you're not familiar with it, just getting around, orient yourself, and then working within an exhibition might be a real hurdle for you to get in. So I always feel that way when I go into an art museum. I've absolutely no idea about art. I did go to an art museum on my own, not with school, like this year for the first time. But for me, I was so inhibition, because if I go into an art museum, people expect that I know a lot of things already. And if you ask things for like a big painter and I don't know, but there's no one there to answer the questions, or sometimes they might not be prepared for people to don't have a basic knowledge. But if I explore something online, the hurdles are so much lower for me, especially in art, because I'm like, oh yes, I can Google Vermeer, I can Google Expressionism, I can do it by myself. There's no one there to judge me, kind of. Does that make sense? So in that case, I believe there's a contrast between the physical world and the online world. And like, I think it's subject specific what you can do. So for me, I come from a science and technology background, and I can imagine that people from a different background might have the same feelings about that topic that I have about art. So what I try to do is, if you bring them in with like a topic to be like, this is for total beginners, that might like bring down these walls. I don't know. I hope this made sense, but I liked what you said, Francesca. And I believe online has a lot of possibilities. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Thank you. This is really important. I think Francesca can give a very good answer. I believe in contemporary art, there's a period of time that people believe that art museums should be a white box, like providing no information, because like interveying the people's aesthetic experience in the museum. Francesca, what's your idea?
Yes, that's a very kind of, the white box is like a modernist idea, the idea that the art should speak for itself and that kind of thing. And so there are definitely still institutions that are still holding on to that legacy, but I do think it's getting better, because I guess as soon as you start to put up wall plaques and information and things like that, then I think it was the idea that someone's dictating that idea, someone's telling you what to think, which limits the kind of conceptual, imaginative approach to the artwork. So the white box is essentially a blank canvas for your interpretation. But obviously a lot of the works within there, it's very different approaching that if you know exactly what these artworks are. It was found to become almost a very inaccessible, very elitist way of approaching art, in which only you'd have to have a certain level of understanding. Otherwise, you would be completely alienated in the way that you were saying. So I do think institutions are getting better, especially if works are becoming more conceptual, or if they have a conceptual approach about how to understand things. But I don't think that we're there yet necessarily. I still think there are a lot of institutions that are still holding on to that white cube idea, because I think I think it has a certain prestige around it that people like to tap into. But no, I'm not a huge fan.
Thank you. I believe that the idea of an institutional wall is developing. Like different generation might experience different idea of a wall. Yeah, I do think the situation changing now. Is quite common that when museum organize some curatorial projects, there is a specific angle or perspective involved, and also encourage audience response to that. And Robert, do you have any question?
It's not a question, just to continue this topic that we're discussing. Yeah, I think I like everyone's idea, and I can really understand what Katharina just said. How you feel when you go into a physical museum, or like when you're viewing exhibitions or objects online. It's really different. So I guess this is kind of a way for museums or galleries to transcend, or to to just go beyond the wall from the inside. because that we had talks last time. Hope gave us presentation on how to decolonize the museum's websites, and for next time we'll have Jiang Han talking about designing the online collections of museums. So I guess why the museums are focusing on these questions and their virtual side of their collections and their exhibitions is, I think, a way to maybe to break down the walls as well. You don't have to physically go into the space, and you can just access it from anywhere in the world. I guess that's just my point of view.
Yes, I think the museum also start embracing like technologies to be more to make the idea more accessible to people, and also provide multiple channels where people can express their idea or being more engaged in art with artworks or objects that provided by museum. And Helena, want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to just link to this topic as well, and what came to mind when you were talking about the wall was that actually the role of the front of house is really essential. And I have to say that before kind of joining, or actually even a few years into working as a curator, kind of years back in my career, I haven't actually realized how important the front of house team is. And we've had a wonderful kind of incident, but in a positive way, in Beverley Art Gallery, where I worked before I started here at York. And we had to move it was a kind of a logistical problem, and we had to move the front of house desk into one of the galleries. And we all thought like, oh, this is going to be terrible because, it will look like an office, it's not going to work. But we had to do it, so we did it. And it was absolutely wonderful because our front of house staff, who are all, none of them are art historians, none of them are curators, but they have spent many years working in the gallery. They know the place inside out, and the way they could engage with the visitors, and exactly what Katerina described, people would come into the gallery, they would look, and they would see works of artists that they haven't heard of before, and so they would, our front of house are just wonderful empathetic people, and they would notice that this visitor is confused, so they would say hi to them, and then they would have like a 40-minute conversation, which would be, it's not an art historical lecture, but as a result, the visitor would feel welcome. They would feel like this is a space that is about them. Plus, they will actually find out quite a lot about the artists and about, whatever they were interested in. So I have to say, when I found out that this is how it actually works with our front of house team, I was blown away. And then I, took part in some sessions with the Museums Association, where they have, I think, recently founded like a section of the Museums Association which is specifically kind of dedicated to front of house. And I thought how wonderful that is, because front of house are so much more than just receptionists. They really have a massive role to play. And after having this experience in Beverley Art Gallery, I really thought how wonderful that there is more empowerment front of house, because they play a really essential role. And this whole conversation about tearing down the wall, they really do kind of do that brick by brick. They do a fantastic job. And that links to what we talked about earlier, the many different roles that they are within, museums. And it's not all about curating. And there are many other roles that can really massively contribute to, personal job satisfaction, but also for kind of propelling the ideals of the museum sector and of making people really engage with the museum and making people feel welcome. And front of house may, well be one of those as well.
Thank you. Really delighted to learn like many different museum practice working with this and make things much better. And is there any question from audience or feedback or opinion or anything you want to talk about? Well, really no, and then we thank you all for so many wonderful discussions and ideas, and bringing many thought-provoking topics to the group. It is so nice to see all of you. Our next event will be on 28th of September, as usual, 6 weeks from now. Next time, we're invited Jiang Han, PhD candidate of University of Leicester, to talk about the design of online collections. they will reply some questions we raised today. And Robert, please copy the link to the chat box for the event registration. And I hope I can see many of you there, and the information will be updated on ICOM's website and social media. We also have a Facebook group now. Robert, could you please copy the link as well? Please follow us if you like, and we only update when we organize student event for you, so don't worry, we'll bother you too much. But if you do like receiving many museum news or information from ICOM, please also follow ICOM's social media. And Robert has something to tell you about ICOM's conference, right? Robert, please talk.
As you all know, we're a part of ICOM UK's organization, and from this weekend, that's the 20th of August to 28th of August, there's a big event happening with ICOM in general. So it's the 2022 ICOM General Conference. It will physically take place in Prague, but for many of you who are interested and can't be there in person, this is the first time that they've made it hybrid, so it means that we can follow it from online. And so here is the link to the event. It's on the ICOM UK's official website. So for any of you guys who's of interest, just please go check it out on the website. Here is the link. So
thank you, Robert. I'd also like to briefly mention that we are currently calling for interest from individuals who are interested in joining our working group as a ICOM student event or co-organizer. And it's a group with 5 members sharing responsibilities and also credits for running ICOM students and emerging professional event. We hope we can produce more new projects beyond our current skills. So if you enjoy working as a project creator, I'm sure this will be a lot of fun for you. Please consider it, please. And thank you, many of you who have submitted a Google form and expressed your interest. We'll confirm more details with you soon. The application will be closed soon in 1 week. So if there's anyone still interested, please let us know by filling the Google form that you can find on the event page you just registered this event. If any of you have any other thoughts about our projects, you are very welcome to contact us. We're looking forward to working with some of you in the future. Before we close the meeting, may I ask if anyone has any questions either about our project or team? If there's no further questions for now, thank you for being here today, and thank you, Francesca, Helena, and everybody. We'll see you soon at our next event. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.